Join us now for Education Matters, a weekly look at the real people and real stories in education across North Carolina.
Welcome to Education Matters, presented by the Public School Forum of North Carolina. I'm Keith Poston. Last week, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction released its annual A to F school performance grades for the state's public schools that continue to reflect a clear relationship between poverty and student test scores. This week, we're going to discuss the latest school grades and the grading system itself. Why do the school grades correlate so strongly to poverty? And do they provide an accurate assessment of the job our schools are doing educating students? And if not, what needs to change? Before we tackle our main topics, we open with our headlines, a quick scan of education headlines across North Carolina and the U.S. Last week, Governor Cooper signed into law the Testing Reduction Act of 2019, which reduces the number of standardized tests given in schools. The biggest change is the elimination of the North Carolina final exams beginning next year. That's more than 20 state tests given to students who teachers can't use another state exam to evaluate their performance. The law also requires school districts to reduce the number of local tests they give. Education Week has released its annual Quality Counts report that ranks the states on K-12 education. Our state falls in the bottom half of the country at 37, primarily due to very low marks when it comes to the amount we spend per student. North Carolina ranks 48th nationally out of 49 states that are in the study. The report highlights a sizable gap between North Carolina and the top states in per pupil spending. After you make regional adjustments, North Carolina spent about $9,000 per student compared to a national average of nearly $13,000. Finally, the latest school report cards highlighted some very disappointing results for the state's new innovative school district. Southside Ashpaw Elementary in Robeson County, the only school in the ISD, received an overall F score and did not meet growth, which is the same as last year when it was part of the local school district. The percentage of students passing state tests actually dropped year over year. Remember, you can visit the Public School Forum's website at ncforum.org, click on Education Matters, and read more about each of these headlines as well as all the other topics we cover each week. As I said at the top of the show, the state released its annual A to F school performance grades last week, and as they have since each year since they began used in about 2013, the grades show a clear linkage to the poverty level of the schools. And we have two guests joining us now who are going to discuss this with us. To my left, we have Dr. Lauren Fox. Lauren is the Senior Policy Director at the Public School Forum of North Carolina. Welcome back to the show. And we have Dr. Helen Sonny Ladd. Many of you know Dr. Ladd as Sonny. She is a Professor Emeritus at Duke University's Sanford School of Public Policy. So let's just for our viewers who don't sort of live and breathe this stuff like we do, what exactly is the A to F school performance grade? Sort of where did it come from? How is it calculated?
So the performance grades are an accountability model that were first introduced in Florida back when Governor Jeb Bush was there. And like you said, they came to North Carolina in 2013. And different states that use A to F performance grades have different ways of calculating them. So in North Carolina, 80% of a school's grade is made up by a measure of student proficiency, and 20% of that is for growth over time in a school year.
So what do you mean when you say proficiency? And I know, Dr. Ladd, you've looked at this too. I mean, what are we talking about here? That's test scores at a certain time? Is that what proficiency is?
Yes, it's just the percentage of students in the school that meet the state standards for the particular grade or grade in the school.
Right, and the growth?
The growth is change over time, so that is a measure more of student learning over the course of the school year.
Right, so let's take a look at, we've got a couple of charts. You've done some analysis, Lauren, about our current grades. I think the first chart we have up, this is the actual A to F themselves. So tell me what we're looking at here.
Right, so in this chart you can really see that what the grades are really measuring is which schools serve large percentages of students who are economically disadvantaged rather than actual student learning. So for example, you can see that of the 21.7% of schools that received either a D or F in North Carolina in the previous school year, 2018 to 2019, 95% of those were serving high poverty populations. So we define that as 41% or more students.
So that's the big red bar over on the far right. That's just basically showing that, like, really, if and that's again everyone who's got an F score. You're talking 95%.
95%.
Okay, and on the other side you've got the really your A schools.
Your A schools, right. And so, for example, you can't see this exactly in the chart, but of those who received an A grade, only one school that served students, more than 80% of students in poverty received an A.
Well, that's a pretty stark difference. I mean, Dr. Ladd, you've looked at this in other, not just in the U.S. and North Carolina, but in other countries. Is that kind of the way it looks?
It's standard, and we should have known that this was going to happen, and lots of people did know that this pattern would show up. It shows up. There are lots and lots of studies over many years and across many states and other countries that show there's a clear relationship between average student achievement in a school and the mix of students who are disadvantaged or often a minority group as well.
Right. And so and that's 80% of the growth. So let's talk a little bit about the 20%, the smaller part of it is growth, which is, again, where do they go from when the way I look at it, when they walked in the door to the end of the year, what kind of job did the school, the teachers do in getting there? I think we've got another chart to look at.
Right.
Is the correlation the same in terms of poverty when it comes to growth?
It's not the same. There is still a disparity between high and lower poverty schools, but you can see, for example, in the chart that of the schools with high concentrations of students who are economically disadvantaged, 71% met or exceeded growth, compared with 79% of schools that are serving fewer students in poverty. So the gap is not nearly as large as in the first chart.
Right, and I think now, I've read, both of you have written on this, and I'll ask this to you, Dr. Ladd. I mean, what are your concerns, I guess, just sort of top line, a system like this to evaluate how a school is doing? Because that's really the whole point, is that these are school performance grades. That theoretically, you can look at this grade and say, that's a good school, that's a bad school.
No, theoretically, maybe some people look at these grades and come to that conclusion, but it's the wrong conclusion. School quality is a complicated measure. Lots of things go into the quality of the school. One of the inputs to the school is the students who come to that school. And students come with very different backgrounds and very different, they bring different things to the schoolhouse door. Advantaged students, children of middle-class families come to school ready to learn, having had lots of exposure to books and good health and travel and after-school programs. They come to school often quite ready to learn. But think about children from who are growing up in poverty, whose parent or parents don't have access to health care for the children,
right,
or who are living under stress and moving from household to household. They come to school much less ready to learn. So it's not the schools, or it's the fact these measures of proficiency say very little about the quality of the school programs and the success of the school.
Well, let's get. I don't think that I don't want to put words in either one of your mouth. We do need to have accountability, right? I mean, there is a balance, I guess. Is there something about that we either have considered or proposed that would make these a little more, I don't know, instructive about what's going on in the school, like the balance between, let's say, proficiency and growth? I mean, looking at growth only, or for example, what do you think?
At the Public School Forum, we've advocated for getting rid of the A to F grades altogether because of the extent to which they stigmatize schools and students and parents and teachers. But there have been proposals in the General Assembly, for example. Every year, the House has put forth a proposal pretty much since these grades were implemented to change the formula to 50% growth and 50% proficiency, which, while I don't know if it's a perfect policy, it's certainly better than the one that we have now.
You think what about you? Do you think the idea of looking at growth, is that better?
I think we ought to get rid of the A to F grades completely. Now, There are some benefits to providing information on the proficiency rates in school and the growth rates. If we want to continue providing that information, we could do it, but let's not combine it into a single grade, which tends to send a signal that that is a measure of school quality when it's not.
It's a pretty blunt instrument. I mean, because I can talk, I was talking to my wife, and you can talk to like anyone, say, well, I wouldn't want to send my kid to an F school, and yet if you don't go in that school or you really know the story, this may be a wonderful learning environment that's perfectly suited for your child, but you look at this big scarlet letter in some ways and it doesn't tell the story.
And it has other disincentive effects as well. If you're a teacher, good teacher, are you going to want to teach in a school that year after year has an F rating? We want some of our good teachers to teach in those schools, so why are we saying those schools are failures? Let's do something to improve the school and to give the school the resources they need to address the real challenges that many low-income students bring to the classroom.
Lauren, last question for you. Is the stigmatization, that's the right word, is that one of your biggest concerns about this?
I think overall that is one of my biggest concerns. But another one, like Helen said, instead of giving schools resources that they need to support their students, a lot of additional policies have been based off of these grades. So that's another concern, that we're not only using them to stigmatize schools, we're also basing things like recommendations for the innovative school district and principal bonuses, for example, off of these performance grades.
All right. Well, we're going to continue the discussion in a minute. I'm going to ask you, Dr. Ladd, you're going to stick around. We've got a teacher and librarian from Durham Public Schools that's going to join us for the conversation. But after a brief commercial break. But before we go to our break, I've got a question for you. The majority of true or false, the majority of states use a letter grade system to grade school performance.
Education Matters is brought to you each week in part by Paragon Bank, serving others, enriching lives.
Welcome back to Education Matters. Did you correctly answer false? In fact, North Carolina is one of only 16 states that are still using A to F school performance grades, and we're the only state that so heavily weights student performance over student growth. We're going to continue our conversation about school performance grades. As I mentioned, Dr. Helen Sunny Ladd from Duke University is going to stay with us, but joining us now is Michelle Burton. Michelle is a teacher and librarian in Durham Public Schools. She's also currently serving as the president of the Durham Association of Educators. So you've got a good, kind of a good window in sort of what's going on in the schools. And I should also mention you've also worked in 3 different school districts. So that's actually my first question for you. You've been in 3 different systems as a teacher, as a librarian. These letter grades, do they accurately reflect what you've seen as far as the job that your colleagues, the teachers are doing in those schools?
Absolutely not. I have worked in so-called A-letter schools, high-performing schools, and schools that have been struggling. And what I have seen throughout my career is that teachers who work in schools that are struggling, they work hard every day to give the kids what they need, and they give it their all every single day. So no, they don't reflect what's actually going on.
Now, is this? This system came in implementation while as you were already working as a teacher. I mean, is this something that's discussed inside the school? I mean, we talked about in the first segment about the stigmatization? I mean, do teachers talk about it? Is it something you go, this F on our school or a D? Is it something that parents or students aware of it?
Actually, teachers don't really talk about it that much. And also, our students don't talk about it much, only when other adults in their lives speak about it, like parents or people in the community. You really hear it from parents because they look at the letter grades online and they make all these assumptions about how good the school is, how good the teachers are. And, it really stigmatizes all the great work that's going on, the people, the kids, everything, the principals. So yeah, you really don't hear, you just hear it from people in the community, mostly parents.
Right. Dr. Ladd, we kind of got into it just a little bit in the first thing. One thing that always, it always, I have a hard time sometimes talking about this correlation with poverty because I don't ever want to give the impression that that it's the kid's fault or even it's the parents' fault, that it's somebody's fault or that they couldn't do the work. You kind of mentioned some of the things that are sort of in the environment of a family living in poverty that actually sort of do affect, let's call it readiness to learn.
And there are lots of things that affect that. Think about dental care. The kids come to school and haven't had any attention to their teeth, and they have toothaches. If they are hungry, think about that. We do try to provide food in most of our schools, lunchtime and breakfast, but that's essential. A lot of children aren't getting good food at home or sufficient food during the week and also very much on the weekends. Healthcare more generally is a big issue. Stress at home for many parents who have multiple jobs and are trying to get home to be with their kids. It's just difficult for schools to do it all. So schools, a lot of schools are, and I would agree with you that teachers are doing a good job, but they can't do it alone. There's no way they can do it alone. If every child grew up in a middle-class, two-parent household, you would be saying education works very well in this country. But that's not the case. More than half the students in North Carolina come from families with income.
Yeah, I think I saw that in one of your
level.
articles. I think at least this may be a couple years old now. 53% of students in North Carolina are living in poverty, which is above the national average. Michelle, look, you see it, right?
Yeah, every day, you know, I teach at a school in Durham where we have kids who live in $400,000 homes, and we have children who live in housing developments, and you can clearly see that those children who come from middle class, upper middle class homes, that their parents can provide for them, and that those children who don't come from those homes, the schools have to fill in those gaps. And you can see where those children need extra supports in order to make them successful. That's why this letter grade system is so detrimental, because it's not really showing all the great things that we're doing for those children who may not get those extra supports at home.
Well, let's talk.
May I just
Go ahead.
pick up on that? So I always wonder what the purpose of the letter grades are. Now, if the state gave letter grades to schools and then used them as a way to distribute lots of additional resources and to the schools
That would kind of make some
weren't doing
sense,
well,
wouldn't it?
then it might make some sense. But there's no way that the letter grades by themselves, through some sort of incentive process that I've never understood, is going to make those schools, make the students in those schools perform a lot better, because the teachers need support. Schools can't do it alone when you've got a lot
That's
of
a good
students in
segue, because look,
poverty.
I always like to, on this show, I want to talk about solutions and there are some interventions, and there are some things going on in Durham that I want you to tell me about, but also start with you, Dr. Ladd. What are some interventions that do have sort of been proven to work with student populations like this?
Yeah. Well, there are lots of them and lots of combinations of them. So there's no magic bullet that's going to solve all the problems. But health clinics in a number of schools would make a lot of sense. And if not health clinics, at least having psychologists and nurses in schools. We have in this state many fewer nurses or psychologists per student than national recommendations or the national average. So trying to address health issues would be one way to go. Another way to go is, or to supplement that, to have after-school programs for kids, summer school programs for kids, to give kids from disadvantaged backgrounds some of the same experiences that children from more advantaged families just
Well, and that's
take
one of
for
the things
granted.
I'm sure you probably see that, Michelle, because those after school and summer, some of those are those costs
yeah.
and transportation and other
Yes.
things. So is that something that that Durham Public Schools has tried to sort of fill the gap?
Well, yeah, and I wanted to mention, I know you said in my introduction, I'm the president of the Durham Association of Educators, and one thing that we did was we got a grant from NEA, National Educators Association, to start the community schools program in Durham. And what we have done is that provided us with a community schools organizer, and we were able to get 4 community schools people at 4 different schools in Durham to provide wraparound services. And just to say that one of the schools, Lakewood Elementary, that's where one of the community schools coordinators went to, and that was one of the schools that was originally on the Innovative School District list to be taken over. And since we started that, since that person is there, that the school achievement has gone up drastically. And because those children, the community schools coordinator is helping the parents and the students get the resources they need in order for them to be successful.
So this is, so let me make sure I understand. So this is it like like a school social worker or a combo of just like whatever is needed, looking at the school and what it needs and sort of connecting the teachers and the parents? How's that working?
Right. Well, they're not exactly a school social worker, but they help in conjunction with the school guidance counselor, the social worker, and the school administration in order to get resources into the schools and to be a connection with the community, so those parents and those kids, they can find things that the children need, you know, dental services, if they need clothing, if the parents need money to help pay the rent, things like that, because you can't do it by yourselves. The social workers, the school guidance counselor, the principal, they can't do it by themselves. Right. So you have to have that extra resource there, and it's really taken off.
Well, you mentioned to me before we started shooting about East Durham Children's Initiative. So external partners are important too, right?
Yes, no, that's right. That's a place-based initiative. So it historically has dealt with one section of Durham. I think they're expanding now to larger parts of Durham, but then the notion is you need to get a number of community partners working together. So I want to focus on the term community. If schools can't do it alone, what do you need? You need lots of community partners, and there are partners out there, but what happens in the Durham Children's Initiative is they work hard to bring some of those partners together, whether they're libraries, whether it's the police, whether it's park services, all sorts, to work together.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but it does sound to me we're talking about we need more resources and support for these schools, but with those, we see good results. So, Sonny, Michelle, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
After the break, this week's final word. What would you think if state legislators created a new A to F school grading system based solely on poverty and just gave A's and B's to the schools that serve the fewest poor students while tagging the schools that serve the most poor students with D's and F's? Now, I'm guessing most of you would think that's a terrible idea, but that is precisely what our current A to F school performance grading system does. Now, when this letter grade system was created by the North Carolina General Assembly, it was copied from former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who said it was perhaps the single most important thing they did in Florida to cause the public to demand more options like private school vouchers and charter schools. Now, when it was created here in North Carolina, legislative leaders told us it was to provide more information for parents. Really? Besides poverty, what does it tell parents? Moreover, as you heard some of our guests mention, no new resources or support have been provided for schools who rate as D's or F's. In fact, the division at the Department of Public Instruction that used to provide direct support to struggling schools was gutted, and the employees were all laid off. So we're really not providing useful information to parents, and we're not using the data to target support for struggling schools. At least Jeb Bush was honest about the intent. It's time to get rid of this stigmatizing and counterproductive school grading system. That's it for this week's show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.